Hello, everyone. This is Jim Okersinski with your week 4 lecture video, where this week we're going to be talking about chapter 2. So, I'm going to highlight what I think is important issues to talk about out of chapter 2. Much of what Ballinger mentions in the chapter have to do with search and keywords and um, not only is the chapter informative, but the resources, the library resources, and the links there for the videos do a great job. So I'll cover that as I move through my PowerPoint. So for me, the most important aspect of chapter 2 is just how to evaluate sources, especially online sources. Over the past several semesters, many of the sources that pop up in annotated bibliographies and also the research essays are coming from some questionable sources or locations out on the internet. Web articles, web pages, um, from really questionable sites. Many are unauthored, and you have to take a moment to think about if somebody doesn't want to put a name to to an article. That is should be called into question. Looking at the source of where you get that information is just critical. I'll talk about that in the PowerPoint in a minute. But evaluating those sources, looking for those authors and their bios, much like we have done in the activity around the critical thinking essay, looking at who Twenge and Lukianoff and Haidt are as far as authors and researchers and their qualifications and credentials is critical. So you should look at your authors for your sources. The idea here is not to collect a bunch of sources just so you meet the criteria of the annotated and ultimately the research essay, but look for information that will move your topic forward, teach you something new, support what you're thinking, and that is the point behind academic research. So, to jump into chapter 2, kind of begins on looking at your research routines. You know, everybody knows Google is great, and it's gotten better. In fact, Ballinger, talks about Google in a section in the textbook. I'll talk about Jason Ertz's video on using Google and how to get the most out of it. The textbook does talk about three types of researchers: the fast surfer, the broad scanner, and the deep diver. At some point, maybe all three of these type of researchers. You may be fast surfing for looking at gathering information broad to accumulate some sources, but ultimately where you need to be is that deep diver where you really take ownership of the material. Being a deep diver allows you to be authoritative, efficient, and has a willingness to suspend your judgment. In other words, remember the purpose behind the research project is for you to learn about something new about your topic, okay? Repeating the same old stuff that you learned or looking for information that you think you know, it's just writing a research report and you're just reporting what you already know. And that's not the goal of this semester. So Ballinger does talk about the power of words and the keyword searches. So the database introduction and searching link in the YouTube video in the weekly course unit there in the library section is excellent for how to work out those keywords to help your search yield better results. All right, that's a must watch there. That's about 30 minutes. Also, Ballinger, like I mentioned earlier, talks about Google and how to get the most of it out of on page 47. So the library video, Google Tips, is about 6 minutes. The two videos that I want to emphasize that are important in your search. I cannot prevent anybody from using Google. I'd love to restrict everybody into the databases in the library, but sometimes it's just not realistic in this day and age of information technology. The only emphasis that I can put on this search is for you to really evaluate your sources. Okay. So, another way to look at sources is, sometimes students lean too heavily on one or two sources. The goal is to vary your source information to establish a well-rounded discussion. What are people saying? The both sides of the argument. You want to start an academic conversation. You don't want the conversation to be one-sided where you're reporting something and writing me the research report. You want to go out, want to engage in that conversation, right? So you're looking at primary sources are original words, secondary sources analyze somebody else's work or a research article using the work of others to support a thesis. Much scholarly work is not only using a lot of research and the works of others to support a thesis in that, but a lot of scholarly works are peer reviewed, and Ballinger talks about what peer review might be in the publication process. That's important. If an article is peer reviewed, it's going to be pretty much credible on its stand because otherwise it would not have made it to publication. Is there objective and subjective, stable or unstable? There's a lot of biased information out on the internet right now. Look closely at your websites. Your .orgs, .edus are going to be offer one type of information. Some .coms or it may look like an official institute of some sort, but they might have a certain bias, and that's their purpose of existence. So you want to make sure that you do scrutinize your source material. So in a textbook, you find something like the inverted pyramid here, where we kind of like a funnel type situation where you go from general encyclopedias to general interest magazines, specialized trade books, government documents, start getting into more specific areas of more credible scholarly books, and then academic journals. So you want to make sure that you do provide some quality research and quality sources in your research project. I say all the time in my classes, garbage in, garbage out. I can use a lot of really questionable sources, questionable on reliability and more so on credibility. So you're going to want to make sure that you use the most reliable and credible sources. It might take a little bit more time, right? But it's all worth it in the end. So, in finding quality sources, when was it published and why is that important? If you're doing something like on social media and technology, you really can't go back 10 years for a source anymore. It may fit what you're trying to say, but really, I mean, that field is changing continuously, and anything that old might not be, might not apply anymore. So, journal articles are better than magazine articles because I mentioned earlier is the peer review and they're scholarly in nature, right? Also, the often cited authors critical to research. Okay, for example, I'll use Twangy as an example there. I mean, she's well authored and well presented in her field. You would certainly take a look at all of her research and what she's done over her 25-year career and take a look at her reports. That would yield some sort of credible um, information. Also, look at her articles. If I'm just using her as an example, it's not you have to use her. But anyway, there is a video in the library section in the weekly course unit about chasing citations. Don't be afraid to grab a couple of citations at the back of your research articles to put you in the direction of finding other sources. That's what we did. That's our grad school existence. I would generate 3 or 4 articles on a topic that were really good, move my conversation, and then I would just chase all the citations and look for the other sources. I could take 3 or 4 and turn it into 10 really, really good sources that were required for a term paper in grad school, and like in literally in like an hour. And so thinking smarter and not working harder is the key to doing research. Critical thinking. Remember the instinct to pause and consider before rushing to judgment. Engaging with these sources is critical, right? Evaluating. Keep your purpose in mind. Favor governmental and educational sources over commercial ones. Those are the .coms. Look for author documents over those without authors. Favor web pages that have been recently updated over those that are more than a year old. Look at the date. Usually a web page will tell you when it was the last time updated. Favor web sources that document their claims over those that don't. And the way a lot of web sources document claims is they have the hyperlinks that allow you to click through and look at their source material. The idea here is you want to make sure that people are sourcing their claims. Now let's get into the authored and unauthored categories. If you look on figure 2.6 on page 54 in the textbook, it gives you the two avenues for looking at authored and unauthored sources, and please take a look at those. If you have an article, this is often what happens in the annotated bibliography. I get sources that'll have a web page, no article, no author listed, and then I'm going to click through on your URL and I'm going to look and I'll read through, and down at the bottom there's an author, and if you click on the link of that author, it'll probably give you a short bio on that author, but yet in my citation I do not have a author indicated, right? So you have to do a little bit more work on your part if you're grabbing just random internet sources, and it's important. You cannot rely on the databases to do that work for you, right? So we talked about developing a working knowledge, and that was a purpose by the few of the links and looking at your topics. For exercise 1.5, focus knowledge, right? You're looking for your information to be relevant. Does it change your question? Does it change your thinking? Focus knowledge requires more focused evaluation. How is your source relevant? Look back and refine your inquiry questions as a continuous process. Continue to look at the literature and then look for patterns on your data. Now, I'm not going to talk about any of the fieldwork activities because of the COVID era that we are in right now. I think it's going to be very unlikely that anybody will go out and do some fieldwork, but you can do some interviews. So if there's somebody out there, right, that might be you consider an expert or non-expert in your topic, you may want to contact them via email. Zoom is always out there in the way of interviewing somebody. You can search the internet, check faculty directory. In the spring, I had a student writing about voting and the Gen Zs and sometimes why they don't vote. So I actually interviewed one of our political science professors that I know on campus for his research essay. So you can look through your sources. Most people are researching something close to them, so non-experts are plentiful. That's how you came across topic, friend of a friend. You can do that. If somebody's had some experience, now I'll talk about that when I get to the annotated bibliography, and I'm running long here. So we'll talk about a thesis as we move forward. So let me pull the PowerPoint down and get to the course unit. Okay, week 4. Also here in the course unit, let's see, here are the videos. Oh, here is the Chasing Citations video, which you should take a look at. Here are the two that I mentioned, the library catalog and searching and the Google Tips. All wonderful videos. Remember, you can get help from a librarian in the COVID age here. So you can contact them and they will do the work for you. That's what I used to do in grad school all the time. So once again, to spend a little bit more time on the annotated, and I know this lecture video is running long, but hey, it's a lecture video and some of these are just going to run a little long because of the nature of the weekly activities. All right, so I have my 4 categories here and I want a broad representation of those categories in your 8 source minimum there. So besides the introduction, published books and articles, this is the category up here. Number 1 is we should pull through the databases. Reputable magazine and newspaper articles if they are substantive. Scholarly technical articles, right? You can look into some books if you can get in some books. I'm not really fussy too much about books, but I want to see some substantial sources. All right, one-page articles off of some internet site is not substantive. All right, the internet sources, these organizations, business, government, blogs, discussion forums, in your annotations of web sources explain Your choice of each one based on its credibility or how it represents an important viewpoint. These internet sources you got to do a little bit of work on. You got to work for the author. You have to explain the relevancy a little bit more. So you have to be careful about those particular categories like multimedia. I really don't have a problem because we do receive a lot of our information through films, documentaries, videos, TED presentations, anything that I consider to be somewhat substantive, right? So you have an idea of getting a couple of videos here, living sources or field work. So I should have amended this, but I didn't. The idea here is I'm looking for maybe an interview, or I'd say one interview, and then you can use that other type of a source, in one of the other categories. Now you need 8. So if you have one interview and you're not doing any field work, that is great. I consider an interview on of an individual um, in a YouTube clip to be basically a multimedia source. All right. So if you have an interview of somebody that you want to include an interview here, that works great. Be aware, I do scrutinize those annotated bibliographies and those sources. That is the basis of your research project. So if you give me like two interviews of, let's say, family members, and you give me like 2 or 3 YouTube clips, and maybe a couple of internet pages, you are probably not going to be really successful in that annotated bibliography, because I do look at the quality of those sources. My suggestion to you, everyone out there, is to take a look at your sources, obtain some nice scholarly or substantive newspaper articles, grab some really good internet sources, because there are good internet sources out there, a TED presentation, maybe a documentary, and then maybe an interview. You need a broad representation of my 4 categories here, along with the introduction and your concluding paragraphs, right? So this should be clear to just about everyone, the expectations on the sources of the annotated bibliography, right? So 3 parts are really part of the process here, okay? The typical annotation should introduce the article by title and author, okay? Where you found it, who the author is, credentials, much like everyone did for the critical thinking essay assignment and for Twenge, Lukianoff, and Haidt, right? Summarize the main argument, and remember, summary has no quotations. And respond to what you find most interesting, significant, confusing, convincing. Explain how the source helps you deeper understanding of your question, right? So 3 parts. Now you can break this up into 3 paragraphs for each annotation. You can, if it's a short source like a YouTube clip that's appropriate, you might be able to do all of this in one good paragraph. Remember, easy reading is happy grading, so you want to format your annotated bibliography accordingly, right? So please review the sample for formatting. And for the 3-part process, this particular annotated bibliography actually does a really good job at addressing the 3 parts. Some will be longer, some will be shorter. I understand that. But you can see that a lot of the information here is just required according to that process of what is an annotation. All right. So you also see how a citation is formatted. Citations are organized and sources are organized alphabetically. Here's the hanging indent, and then we have the link. Okay, the link is requirement for MLA 8, because I can guarantee you that in your GDoc, and it's a great thing about GDocs is that I can hover and they'll take me right to the website. All right, I'm sorry, folks, I'm running on to the 20-minute mark, but hey, it is a lecture video and there's a lot going on this week. So if you have any questions, Please send me an email. I would be working on everything diligently. The research modules this week, the discussion board, and start researching some of the sources for your annotated bibliography because that will be due shortly, right? You want to check those schedule and due dates. All right, that being said, good luck and stay safe out there.